The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village as Sergeant Marcus Doc Rodriguez adjusted his medical kit for the third time. His hands, steady enough to perform surgery under fire, trembled slightly as he checked his supplies. After 8 years as a Navy SEAL medic, he had seen enough wounded soldiers to fill a small cemetery, but today felt different. Today marked exactly 1 year since the incident that had changed everything. The convoy rolled through the narrow streets of Kandahar province, their armored vehicles kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the air like ghosts. Marcus sat in the back of the lead vehicle, his trained eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. The intelligence report had been clear. A high-value target was hiding somewhere in this village, someone who had been feeding information to insurgent groups for months. 2 minutes out, called Staff Sergeant Johnson from the front seat. Marcus nodded, running through his mental checklist one more time. In his experience, operations like these could go sideways fast, and when they did, his skills would mean the difference between life and death for his teammates. The village appeared peaceful enough as they approached. Children played in the narrow alleyways, their laughter echoing off the mud brick walls. Women in colorful scarves hurried about their daily business, carefully avoiding eye contact with the approaching vehicles. It was a scene Marcus had witnessed countless times before, yet something felt off. The usual sounds of daily life seemed muted, as if the entire village was holding its breath. As the convoy came to a stop, Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every mission. His team moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role without need for verbal commands. The plan was simple: secure the perimeter, search for the target, and extract any intelligence that could help prevent future attacks on American forces. The team leader, Lieutenant Hayes, signaled for the squad to move forward. They approached a modest compound at the center of the village, its walls higher than the surrounding buildings. According to their intelligence, this was where they would find their target, a Taliban operative known only as the Voice, who had been coordinating attacks throughout the region. Marcus positioned himself near the entrance, ready to provide medical support if needed. He watched as his teammates prepared to breach the compound's wooden door. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of children playing several streets away. The explosion came without warning. The world erupted in a flash of orange and black, the force of the blast throwing Marcus backward against a concrete wall. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine as debris rained down around him. Through the smoke and dust, he could see the twisted remains of what had been the compound's entrance. The smell of cordite and burning wood filled his nostrils as he struggled to regain his bearings. Training kicked in immediately. Marcus ignored the sharp pain in his shoulder and the warm trickle of blood running down his forehead as he rushed toward his fallen teammates. Lieutenant Hayes lay motionless near the blast crater, his body armor shredded but his pulse still strong. Corporal Williams was conscious but screaming, clutching his leg where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. "I need pressure here," Marcus shouted to anyone who could hear him, his hands already working to stop the bleeding from Williams' wound. The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of emergency medical procedures, tourniquets, pressure bandages, morphine injections. He moved from one wounded teammate to another with mechanical precision, his years of training overriding the chaos around him. It was then that he heard it, a soft whimpering coming from somewhere inside the damaged compound. Marcus looked up from the wounded soldier he was treating, his attention drawn to the sound. Someone was alive in there, possibly injured, possibly their target. "Williams, can you hear me?" Marcus asked, checking the wounded corporal's pupils for signs of concussion. Williams nodded weakly, his pain medication beginning to take effect. "Doc, there's someone in there," Williams whispered, gesturing toward the smoking ruins of the compound entrance. I heard crying." Marcus hesitated for a moment, torn between his duty to his wounded teammates and his responsibility to investigate. The sound came again, definitely human, definitely in distress. He made a quick decision, ensuring Williams' wound was stable before grabbing his medical kit. and moving toward the compound. The interior of the building was a maze of collapsed beams and scattered debris. Dust particles danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through holes in the roof. Marcus called out in both English and the few words of Pashto he knew, listening for any response. The sound led him deeper into the building, past what had once been a kitchen, and through a narrow hallway that somehow remained mostly intact. At the end of the corridor, he found a small room where the crying was coming from. What he discovered there would change his understanding of everything. Huddled in the corner, partially hidden beneath a fallen wooden beam, was a figure in traditional Afghan clothing. At first glance, Marcus assumed it was a local woman caught in the blast. But as he moved closer, carefully lifting away debris, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The person's hands were bound with military-grade zip ties. Fresh bruises covered visible skin, and there were clear signs of prolonged captivity, malnutrition, dehydration, and the hollow look in the eyes that Marcus had learned to recognize in rescued prisoners of war. But it was when the person looked up at him that Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. Blue eyes. Distinctly American blue eyes in a face that was unmistakably Caucasian despite the traditional Afghan dress. This wasn't a local civilian caught in the crossfire. This was an American, and based on a short haircut barely visible beneath the head covering and the lean, athletic build, likely military. American? Marcus asked softly, kneeling down beside the injured figure. Are you American military? The person's lips moved, but no sound came out. They pointed to their throat and shook their head, indicating they couldn't speak. Whether from injury, trauma, or something else, Marcus couldn't tell. Working quickly, Marcus checked for injuries while trying to piece together what he was seeing. The person appeared to be in their late 20s or early 30s, with the kind of physical conditioning that spoke of military training. There were old scars visible on their arms and hands, the kind that came from combat, not accidents. As Marcus began treating the most obvious injuries, a deep gash on the forehead, possible concussion, dehydration, he noticed something else that made his mind race. Beneath the traditional Afghan clothing, he could see the tan lines that came from wearing military uniforms in desert environments. This person had been in Afghanistan for some time, but not as a civilian. Listen, Marcus said quietly, keeping his voice calm and professional despite the questions racing through his mind. I'm a Navy SEAL medic. You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need to know, are you military? Are you the person we came here looking for? The person's eyes widened, and they shook their head vigorously. They pointed to themselves and then made a series of hand gestures that Marcus recognized as military sign language. The message was clear, friendly, American, need help. But there was something else in those gestures, something that made Marcus pause. The precision of the movements, the speed with which they were executed. This wasn't someone who had learned basic military signs for emergency situations. This was someone who was fluent in tactical communication. As Marcus continued his medical assessment, more questions arose. The person's physical condition suggested they had been held captive for weeks, possibly months. But their muscle tone and the calluses on their hands indicated recent combat experience. How did an American soldier end up as a prisoner in a Taliban compound they had been sent to raid? The sound of voices outside reminded Marcus that he needed to get his patient to safety. His teammates would be wondering where he was, and there could be more explosives in the building. He helped the person to their feet, noting the way they moved, careful, controlled, like someone accustomed to operating in dangerous environments. Can you walk? Marcus asked. The person nodded and took a tentative step forward. Despite obvious exhaustion and injury, they moved with the kind of discipline that came from years of military training. As they made their way through the debris-filled compound, Marcus's mind worked overtime trying to understand the situation. The intelligence report had mentioned a high-value target, someone who had been feeding information to enemy forces. But the person he was rescuing was clearly American military, clearly a prisoner, clearly not the enemy operative they had come to find. Unless, the thought hit Marcus like a physical blow. What if the intelligence was wrong? What if the person they thought was a Taliban operative was actually an American prisoner? What if this whole operation had been based on false information? Outside, the rest of the team had secured the area and was preparing for extraction. The wounded had been stabilized and were ready for transport to the nearest medical facility. When Marcus emerged from the compound supporting the rescued prisoner, the reaction from his teammates was immediate and intense. "What the hell, Doc?" Sergeant Johnson called out, his weapon trained on the figure in Afghan dress. "Who is that?" "Friendly," Marcus called back quickly. "American military, I think. Prisoner of war." Lieutenant Hayes, despite his own injuries, struggled to sit up and get a better look. His face went pale as he processed what he was seeing. "That's not possible," Hayes said slowly. "Intelligence said the target was Taliban, said they were operating out of this compound." Marcus helped his patient sit down against a wall, noting the way they kept their eyes down and remained silent. The inability to speak seemed to be genuine, whether from physical injury or psychological trauma. He couldn't tell. "Sir," Marcus said to Hayes, "I think we need to reconsider our intelligence. This person was bound, obviously held against their will. Look at the injuries, the signs of captivity. This isn't our target." Hayes studied the rescued prisoner for a long moment, his expression growing more troubled by the second. "Get them ready for transport," he finally said. "We'll sort this out back at base." As the team prepared to move out, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach drop. In the distance, village elders were gathering, their faces grim. They were pointing at the compound and talking in urgent, hushed tones. Whatever had happened here, whoever this prisoner was, the locals knew more than the American intelligence reports had suggested. The helicopter ride back to base was tense and quiet. Marcus sat beside his rescued patient, monitoring their vital signs and thinking about the implications of what they had found. If this person was indeed American military, how had they ended up in Taliban hands? And, more importantly, why had intelligence suggested they were the enemy? As the base came into view, Marcus made a decision that would prove to be crucial in the days to come. He was going to find out exactly who this person was and what had happened to them. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, from the intelligence that led them to the compound, to the convenient timing of the explosion, to the way the village elders had reacted. The wounded, but wordless figure beside him represented more than just a medical case. They were a puzzle that could unravel everything Marcus thought he knew about their mission, their intelligence network, and possibly the war itself. As they touched down on the landing pad, medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers for the wounded. Marcus helped transfer his mysterious patient to the medical team, but not before catching something in their eyes. A look of recognition mixed with fear as they saw the base's intelligence officers approaching. Whatever secret this person was carrying, whatever truth lay behind their capture and rescue, Marcus was determined to uncover it. In his 8 years as a SEAL medic, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that nothing about this mission had been what it seemed. The medical bay was a whirlwind of activity as the wounded were processed and treated. Marcus watched from across the room as his rescued patient was examined by the base's chief medical officer, noting the way they recoiled from certain questions and seemed particularly distressed when intelligence personnel entered the room. It was then that Marcus noticed the small tattoo partially visible beneath a bandage on the patient's wrist, a tattoo he recognized because he had the same one. It was the insignia of a classified special operations unit, one that officially didn't exist and whose members were sworn to secrecy about their missions. The room fell silent as Marcus realized the true magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a case of mistaken intelligence or wrong place, wrong time. This was something much bigger, much more dangerous, and much closer to home than any of them had imagined. The base medical facility buzzed with controlled urgency as Marcus processed what he had discovered. The tattoo on his rescued patient's wrist was unmistakable. A small eagle perched on a trident, the unofficial mark of Operation Ghost Wind. one of the most classified special operations programs in the military. Marcus knew it because he had been recruited for the same program 2 years earlier, though he had ultimately chosen to remain with his SEAL unit. Dr. Sarah Chun, the base's chief medical officer, approached Marcus with a clipboard and a worried expression. "Your patient is stable, but there's something you need to know," she said quietly. "The blood work shows evidence of prolonged stress, malnutrition, and something else, traces of interrogation drugs in their system." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Interrogation drugs meant this person hadn't just been held captive. They had been systematically tortured for information. "How long?" he asked. "Based on the metabolites and physical condition, I'd estimate at least 2 months, possibly 3, Dr. Chun replied. "But, Marcus, there's something else. The dental records." Before she could finish, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the base intelligence chief, appeared beside them. Morrison was a career officer with cold eyes and a reputation for getting results regardless of the methods required. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Morrison said with forced casualness, "I understand you were the one who found our mystery guest. I need you to walk me through exactly what happened in that compound." Marcus looked between Dr. Chun and Morrison, sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. "Sir, I found them bound and injured in what appeared to be a holding cell. Clear signs of captivity and abuse. They haven't been able to speak since the rescue." Morrison nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And you didn't find any intelligence materials? Documents, communications equipment, anything that might indicate what they were doing there?" "No, sir," Marcus replied carefully. "The compound was mostly destroyed by the explosion. I was focused on medical treatment and extraction." Dr. Chun cleared her throat. "Colonel Morrison, about those dental records." Morrison's hand shot up, cutting her off. "Doctor, I think we should discuss any medical findings in a more private setting." "Sergeant Rodriguez, you're dismissed. Excellent work today." As Marcus walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being deliberately excluded from something important. The way Morrison had shut down Dr. Chun, the tension in the medical bay when intelligence officers were present, the fear in his patient's eyes, it all pointed to a conspiracy that went deeper than a simple rescue operation. That evening, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the rescued prisoner, alone in the medical bay, unable to speak, and clearly terrified of something. Against his better judgment, he decided to check on them. The medical bay was dimly lit and nearly empty at 0200 hours. Marcus made his way to the private room where his patient was being held, surprised to find only a single guard posted outside. For someone who had potentially been working with enemy forces, security seemed unusually light. The guard, a young private named Jenkins, nodded as Marcus approached. "Evening, Sergeant. Here to check on your patient." "Just wanted to see how they're doing," Marcus replied. "Any problems tonight?" Jenkins shook his head. "Kie, azagravi." Though he hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Doc, there was something weird earlier. That Colonel Morrison came by with a couple of guys in civilian clothes. They weren't medical personnel, but they went in there for about an hour." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Civilian intelligence operatives questioning a wounded prisoner without medical supervision violated several protocols. "Did they say what they wanted?" "No, sir, but when they left, your patient was pretty shaken up. Wouldn't even look at the nurses when they came to check vitals." Marcus thanked Jenkins and entered the room quietly. His patient was awake, staring at the ceiling with haunted eyes. When they saw Marcus, there was a visible moment of relief, followed immediately by a gesture for him to be quiet. The patient pointed to their ear and then around the room, indicating they believed they were being monitored. Then, moving carefully to avoid the monitoring equipment, they began using military sign language to communicate. "Name is Alex Cameron." They signed, their movements precise despite their injuries. "Captain, Army Special Forces, Ghost Wind Program. Been undercover for 4 months." Marcus felt his world shift again. Captain Cameron wasn't a prisoner of war. They were an undercover operative who had been compromised. But That raised even more questions about why their own forces had been sent to raid the compound where they were being held. What happened? Marcus signed back, positioning himself to block the room's surveillance camera. Cameron's hands moved quickly, telling a story that made Marcus's blood run cold. Was investigating weapons trafficking. Taliban getting advanced American tech. Discovered the source, someone high up in our command structure selling to insurgents. Got caught before I could report back. The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. If Cameron was right, then someone in the American command structure was not only selling weapons to the enemy, but had also orchestrated the raid to eliminate the one person who could expose them. Who? Marcus signed. Cameron glanced toward the door nervously before continuing. Don't know for certain, but the raids have been too precise, too well-informed. Someone's feeding them our operational plans. Morrison questioned me earlier. He knows I'm close to the truth. Marcus felt pieces of a horrifying puzzle falling into place. The convenient intelligence that led them to the compound, the explosion that had nearly killed Cameron and his entire team, Morrison's behavior since the rescue. It all suggested a cover-up operation designed to silence a whistleblower. We need to get you out of here, Marcus signed. Cameron shook their head. Too dangerous. They're watching everything. But there's evidence hidden in my gear at a safe house in Kabul. Digital files proving the weapon's sales. Need someone to retrieve it. Before Marcus could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Cameron quickly lay back down and closed their eyes, pretending to sleep. Marcus moved to a more natural position, checking Cameron's foreline as the door opened. Dr. Chun entered, looking surprised to see Marcus there. Sergeant, is everything all right? Couldn't sleep, Marcus replied honestly. Wanted to check on them. Dr. Chun nodded, then moved closer to Marcus and spoke in a low voice. I tried to tell you earlier, the dental records came back. This person is Captain Alex Cameron, reported missing in action 3 months ago during a classified operation. Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral, but Dr. Chun continued. The problem is, according to the official report, Captain Cameron was killed in action. Their death certificate was signed 2 months ago. The ramifications were staggering. If Cameron was officially dead, then their rescue had never happened. There would be no record of the operation, no accountability for what had been done to them, and no investigation into the intelligence failure that had nearly gotten them killed again. Doctor, Marcus said carefully, what happens to someone who officially doesn't exist? Dr. Chin's expression was grim. That depends on who's making the decisions. But right now, I'm the only thing standing between Captain Cameron and a very unfortunate accident. Over the next few days, Marcus watched as the situation around Cameron became increasingly dangerous. Morrison's visits became more frequent and more aggressive. The guard detail changed to personnel Marcus didn't recognize. Most concerning of all, Cameron's medical files began to reflect a deteriorating condition that Marcus knew wasn't accurate. It became clear that Morrison and his accomplices were preparing to eliminate Cameron permanently, making it look like they had succumbed to their injuries. But they had underestimated Marcus's determination to protect his patient. Working with Dr. Chun, Marcus began developing a plan to extract Cameron from the base and get them to safety. It would require careful timing, significant risk, and help from people he hoped he could trust. The breakthrough came when Marcus was reviewing Cameron's personal effects, items that had been recovered from the compound. Hidden in the lining of what appeared to be a traditional Afghan vest was a small, encrypted communication device. When Marcus activated it, he found recorded messages that Cameron had been sending to a contact in military intelligence, someone who was apparently investigating the same weapons trafficking ring. The contact was Major Rebecca Torres, a military intelligence officer stationed at the Pentagon. According to the device, she had been expecting Cameron's final report before the operation went wrong. Marcus realized that Torres might be their only hope for exposing the truth and protecting Cameron. Using the base's secure communication system, Marcus reached out to Torres, identifying himself and explaining the situation. Her response was immediate and, alarmed, she had been told that Cameron was dead and that the investigation had been closed due to lack of evidence. Sergeant Rodriguez, Torres said during their encrypted video call, if Captain Cameron is alive, then we have a major problem. The people who reported their death are the same ones I suspected of being involved in the weapons trafficking. Torres explained that she had been conducting her own investigation into the sale of American military technology to insurgent groups. Cameron had been her inside source, gathering evidence that would have exposed a network involving several high-ranking officers and defense contractors. I need that evidence, Torres said. Without it, I can't move against the people responsible. But if they know Cameron is alive, they're planning to kill them. Marcus finished. Tonight, probably. Cameron's medical records are being falsified to show deteriorating condition. Torres was quiet for a moment, then spoke with military precision. Sergeant, I'm going to send you extraction coordinates. Can you get Cameron out of that base? Marcus looked across the room to where Cameron lay sleeping, still recovering from their injuries, but growing stronger each day. Yes, ma'am, but we'll need a distraction. Leave that to me, Torres replied. I'm going to make some calls that will have Morrison and his people very busy for the next few hours. As Marcus prepared for what might be the most important mission of his career, he reflected on how a simple medical rescue had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of the entire operation in Afghanistan. Cameron represented more than just a wounded soldier. They were a key witness whose testimony could prevent further betrayals and save countless American lives. The extraction would have to be perfect. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and both Marcus and Cameron would join the list of soldiers who had died under mysterious circumstances. But as Marcus checked his equipment one final time, he knew he had no choice. Some things were worth risking everything for, and the truth was one of them. The next few hours would determine whether justice would prevail or whether the conspiracy would succeed in burying its secrets along with anyone who threatened to expose them. The extraction began at 0300 hours, exactly as Major Torres had promised. Marcus heard the commotion before he saw it. Raised voices, running footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of vehicles rushing across the base. Torres had apparently made good on her promise to create a distraction, though Marcus couldn't see what was happening from his position near the medical bay. Dr. Chun appeared at Marcus's side, her medical bag in hand, and determination in her eyes. Whatever Major Torres did, it's got Morrison and his entire team running around like their hair's on fire, she whispered. Half the base command staff just got summoned to an emergency meeting with some very angry people from Washington. Marcus nodded, checking his watch. They had a narrow window of opportunity, and everything had to go perfectly. Cameron was already awake and dressed in medical scrubs that Dr. Chun had provided. Their voice was still gone, but their eyes showed they understood the gravity of the situation. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked Cameron, who responded with a firm nod and a hand signal indicating they were prepared for anything. The three of them moved through the medical bay with practiced efficiency. Dr. Chun had arranged for the night shift personnel to be dealing with a medical emergency in another part of the facility, leaving their route clear. Marcus carried a medical bag that contained not only first aid supplies, but also the encrypted communication device and Cameron's personal effects. They made it to the base perimeter without incident, but the real challenge was still ahead. The extraction point was 2 miles outside the base, in a location where a helicopter could land without being detected by base radar. Marcus had studied the terrain during the day, identifying the safest route through the rocky hills that surrounded the facility. Cameron moved with surprising strength for someone who had been through months of captivity and torture. Their special forces training was evident in every careful step, every hand signal that helped them navigate the darkness without making a sound. Marcus found himself gaining even more respect for the soldier who had endured so much while protecting crucial intelligence. As they reached the halfway point to the extraction zone, Cameron suddenly stopped and grabbed Marcus's arm. They pointed to a ridge line about 100 yards away, where the faint outline of armed figures was visible against the starlit sky. They found us. Marcus realized, his heart sinking. Somehow, Morrison's people had discovered their escape and were moving to intercept them. Cameron began signing rapidly. Their messages cleared despite the darkness. 3 vehicles, at least 12 men, military weapons. They're setting up a perimeter to trap us. Marcus studied the terrain, looking for alternative routes. They were in a valley with steep walls on both sides, and the enemy forces were positioned to block both the forward path and any retreat back to the base. It was a textbook ambush setup, which meant they were dealing with trained military personnel, not just base security. "We need a call for backup," Marcus whispered, reaching for his radio. Cameron stopped him with a sharp hand gesture. "No radio communication. They're monitoring all frequencies. That's how they found us so quickly." The situation seemed hopeless until Cameron pointed to a narrow ravine that cut through the eastern wall of the valley. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it would require them to climb over sharp rocks in complete darkness, but it might be their only option. "Can you make that climb?" Marcus asked, concerned about Cameron's recent injuries. Cameron's response was to immediately start moving toward the ravine, their determination overriding any physical limitations. Marcus and Dr. Chun followed, trying to move as quietly as possible while the enemy forces positioned themselves for what they clearly expected to be an easy capture. The climb through the ravine was brutal. Sharp stones cut through their clothing, and the narrow passages forced them to crawl on their hands and knees for long stretches. Dr. Chin struggled with the physical demands, and Marcus found himself helping both her and Cameron navigate the most difficult sections. Halfway through the ravine, they heard voices echoing from the valley below. Morrison's team had discovered their escape route and were following them into the rocky passage. Flashlight beams danced across the walls around them, growing closer by the minute. Cameron signaled for them to stop, then disappeared into a side passage that Marcus hadn't even noticed. A few seconds later, they reappeared with a large rock in their hands. Working together, they positioned the rock at a narrow choke point in the ravine, creating a temporary barrier that would slow down their pursuers. It wasn't much, but it bought them the precious minutes they needed to reach the top of the ridge. From there, they could see the extraction point in the distance, a flat area where a helicopter could land safely. They could also see the aircraft circling in the darkness, waiting for their signal. Marcus activated a small infrared beacon, knowing it would guide the helicopter to their position, but also alert anyone with night vision equipment to their location. It was a calculated risk. They needed the extraction, but they were also announcing their position to their enemies. The helicopter touched down just as the first of Morrison's men emerged from the ravine behind them. The pilot was a woman Marcus didn't recognize, but she wore the uniform of a military intelligence unit and moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dangerous extractions. "Get in," she shouted over the rotor noise. "We've got about 30 seconds before this place gets very unfriendly." Marcus helped Cameron and Dr. Chun into the aircraft, then jumped in himself just as gunfire erupted from the ridgeline. The helicopter lifted off immediately, banking sharply to avoid the incoming bullets. As they gained altitude, Marcus could see the full scope of Morrison's operation. There weren't just 12 men. There were at least 36 personnel surrounding the area, including vehicles with mounted weapons. This wasn't a simple attempt to recapture escaped prisoners. It was a military operation designed to eliminate witnesses to a massive conspiracy. The pilot introduced herself as Captain Lisa Park, Military Intelligence. "Major Torres sends her regards," she said. "She's very interested in hearing what Captain Cameron has to say about weapons trafficking and missing American technology." Cameron still couldn't speak, but they began signing to Marcus, who translated for the others. "Cameron says the evidence is hidden at a safe house in Kabul. Digital files, photographs, recordings of conversations. Everything needed to prove that American military technology has been systematically sold to insurgent groups." Dr. Chin spoke up from her seat near the window. "There's something else you need to know. I managed to copy Cameron's original medical files before Morrison's people could completely alter them. The injuries and drug residue patterns tell a story of systematic torture designed to extract specific information. Captain Park's expression grew grim. Major Torres suspected as much. We've been tracking unusual weapons patterns in insurgent attack for months. American technology showing up in places it shouldn't be, tactical knowledge that could only come from inside sources. As the helicopter flew through the night sky toward Kabul, Cameron began the long process of telling their story through sign language. Marcus translated the horrific details of how Cameron had infiltrated the weapons trafficking network, only to discover that it involved American officers who were selling not just weapons, but also operational intelligence to the highest bidder. The safe house in Kabul turned out to be a nondescript building in a residential neighborhood. Cameron led them to a hidden compartment in the basement, where they retrieved several encrypted hard drives and a collection of photographs that documented meetings between American military personnel and known insurgent leaders. Major Torres was waiting for them at a secure facility in Kabul, along with investigators from the Pentagon's Internal Affairs Division. When she saw Cameron alive, her relief was visible and immediate. "Captain Cameron," she said formally, then switched to sign language. "I thought I had lost my best investigator. Are you ready to help us bring down this network?" Cameron nodded and began providing their testimony through Marcus's translation. Over the next several hours, they laid out the entire conspiracy, names, dates, locations, and financial transactions that proved a systematic betrayal of American forces in Afghanistan. The evidence was overwhelming. Morrison and at least 6 other high-ranking officers have been selling advanced military technology to insurgent groups, including night vision equipment, encrypted communication devices, and detailed information about American patrol routes and operational plans. The human cost was staggering. Dozens of American soldiers had died in attacks that were only possible because the enemy had advanced knowledge of their movements. Convoy routes, safe house locations, even the timing of supply deliveries had all been compromised. Dr. Chin's medical evidence proved that Cameron had been tortured specifically to reveal the extent of their investigation. The insurgents who captured them had been trying to learn how much American intelligence knew about the trafficking network and who else might be investigating. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that Morrison's attempt to eliminate Cameron was just the tip of the iceberg. The conspiracy involved defense contractors, banking officials, and politicians who had profited from the illegal weapons sales. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself testifying before a closed session of Congress, describing the rescue operation and everything that followed. Cameron was there too. Their voice finally returned after surgery to repair damage caused by their captivity. The room fell silent as Cameron spoke for the first time since their rescue, describing months of torture and the desperate attempt to protect intelligence that could save American lives. Their voice was hoarse and quiet, but their words carried the weight of absolute truth. "The hardest part," Cameron said, "wasn't the physical torture. It was knowing that while I was being held, American soldiers were dying because of information I couldn't get back to my superiors. Every day I spent in that cell, more of our people were walking into ambushes that could have been prevented." Marcus watched from the witness table as senators and representatives absorbed the magnitude of the betrayal. These weren't abstract policy failures or bureaucratic mistakes. These were deliberate acts of treason that had cost American lives. The final tally was sobering. 17 officers and civilians were arrested, including Morrison and 2 members of Congress who had facilitated the weapons sales. The financial investigation revealed that over $50 million in military equipment had been sold to insurgent groups over a 2-year period. But the real victory wasn't in the arrests or the recovered money. It was in the attacks that didn't happen because the trafficking network had been dismantled. Intelligence analysts estimated that the exposed conspiracy had prevented dozens of future casualties. 6 months after the rescue, Marcus received orders transferring him to a new assignment with the Pentagon Security Division. His final duty at the Afghan base was to visit Cameron, who was recovering at a military hospital in Germany. Cameron looked healthier than Marcus had seen them since the rescue. Their voice was stronger, and they moved without the careful hesitation that had marked their first weeks of freedom. "I never thanked you properly," Cameron said as they sat in the hospital garden. "Not just for the medical treatment, but for believing me when no one else would." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You're the one who risked everything to protect other soldiers. I just did my job." Cameron smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "Your job was to treat my injuries and get me stable for transport. Everything else, the investigation, the extraction, standing up to Morrison, that was a choice. And it saved lives." As Marcus prepared to leave Germany for his new assignment, he reflected on how a routine medical rescue had become the most important mission of his career. The wounded soldier he had found in that compound had been carrying secrets that changed everything, but it was their courage in the face of torture and their determination to protect fellow soldiers that had truly made the difference. The conspiracy had been exposed, the traffickers were in prison, and American forces in Afghanistan were safer because one person had been willing to risk everything for the truth. Sometimes, Marcus realized, the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with integrity, courage, and the willingness to do what was right even when it seemed impossible. Cameron would return to active duty eventually, their voice restored and their mission complete. The scar on their throat would fade, but the impact of their sacrifice would protect American soldiers for years to come. In a war where the lines between friend and enemy were often blurred, they had proven that some people could always be trusted to choose honor over profit, truth over convenience, and courage over fear. The room had indeed fallen silent when Marcus discovered Cameron's true identity. But it was Cameron's voice, finally heard and finally believed, that had spoken a truth that saved so many others.